Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, and thank you very much for attending. And I hope I'm able to provide some insight in relation to my operational policing of this particular issue. And I hope we can have a better debate following this as we raise it in the public psyche. Can I just say, I retired last Tuesday, and I didn't expect to be doing this, if I'm honest with you. I just thought that I'd retire and take a leisurely time off it. But as a chief police officer, I'm required to do 3 months notice, and I gave 3 months notice some time ago. But since then we had the horrible attack on Westminster Bridge, and I led the community response to that, and that stirred a number of emotions in me. And I was actually on call for London, which means when you're an ACPO officer, when you're a chief officer, you have responsibility for the whole of policing across London 24/7, and that's for a whole week's period. And I got the call to say there had been a suicide bomb go off in Manchester. And initially I was shocked and surprised, disbelief, if I'm honest with you, even in the operational psyche where you expect the unexpected, especially in London as a police officer. But what stirred me the most was I put the phone down, and initially I was told it was a suicide blast. Could have been up to 3 people involved. You know, initially you just don't know the detail, and I was shocked to hear that 4 people had died. And I remember putting the phone down, and just before I walked out, because I was making my way into our SOR, which is our special operations room at Lambeth, the phone went again. So I just walked the extent of my lounge, and you know, London property, that's about 3 feet. And the phone went off again to say, sir, there's 20 fatalities. And it just hit me, it really hit me hard, thinking, you know, now we're having suicide blasts in our country, and that's not acceptable, and we have to fight this extremism and fight it hard. So I led London's response to that, worked with colleagues, good friends, chief officer teams in Manchester, and I'll explain why some of the things changed and as I go through my talk. And then on my exit out of the organisation, I was wonderfully sort of hosted and received by lots of communities, and I was out last Saturday. I was at the Ramadan Iftar, which is fast opening ceremony with the Sudanese community, just leaving that, and we heard about London Bridge and Borough Market, and I was back to work 3 days before retirement, responding to that. That changed, in my view, and I think a lot of people would agree, how we are, what the status is in this country, community relations, cohesion, engagement, and what we need to do. That was the turning point. That was the absolute turning point. So this morning I'm just going to talk about the approach. I would like to just describe how we normally respond, what I've responded to, and why we take that approach. Then I'm going to talk about why the 3 things, the 3 events in the last 9 weeks have changed our environment. Then I'll talk about, well, actually, you know, I think it's time for a new way. I'll try and describe what that new way may be. The fact that we need trust and confidence at the heart of our communities, but why it's so difficult, why it's not easy, and why by simply saying that we need a counter narrative, that's never going to work in my view. It's part of it, it might help, but it's not the full solution. Then I'm going to talk about how communities, despite their denominational and sect differences and doctrinal differences, how it's further complicated with what I think is intergenerational gap within Muslim communities, which is then further aggravated by an identity crisis set within a context of perhaps grievance or lack of integration, and then not surprised that people can be picked off by an ideology that's so compelling and appealing. And then I have a look at what we've been doing, and I'm not so sure that we've been engaged at the right level, to the right depth, in being able to handle it. But that takes a lot of skill. You need to take people with you, and you need to drive out this ideology, because it's an ideology, it's not a tangible thing that you can just pick up and destroy. You've got to drive it out of people's hearts and minds. And then, if I may, with your permission, I'm just going to finish off with, I think it's a call for action now, and I'd like to just identify 9 or 10 points which I think we need to do now and deliver within 3 months if we're going to separate ourselves from a strong community that's resilient and defiant, and it's not going to work here, put off further attacks. Because one thing I don't want to do is, with all respect to our cousins in France, I don't want us to become a France where the reoccurrence of these attacks seems to be ever so frequent now. So if I may start then. So my journey with this started as a commander, and I led the response to Lee Rigby back in 2013. I think, if I'm really honest with you, I think we did, at that time, a good job, but I think it was too slow. I don't think we had the confidence, I don't think we had the necessarily skills to be able to deal with it. I remember writing the engagement strategy overnight and delivering it the next morning. We'd lost 12, 14 hours. Too slow. Far too slow. You've got to be on it, at it, and you have to be dealing or operating at speed. I think we got a lot better with Charlie Hebdo. That wasn't quite the same as some of the terrorist attacks that we're seeing because of the nature of that, but nevertheless, our French community were concerned and we had to reassure them. But what really changed was the attack on civilization with Bataclan in Paris in November last year. Year before, sorry. And then after that, we've had Paris, we've had Brussels, then we had Brussels again, Orlando, Nice, Berlin, Quebec, Paris again, and I can go on to talk about other cities, but you get the point. And then London, Manchester, and London, quite sobering. And I've had the responsibility of providing the national policing response to that. A, to try and immediately reassure our communities, absolutely reassure the communities, prevent a backlash, make sure that we stay on the same page in driving things forward. And I think that we've done that reasonably well through those episodes, if I'm honest with you, to the point where we were having attacks in European cities, and there's very rarely a blip in community tensions, adverse responses on social media against Muslims, and hate crime was hardly touched. And then as we were doing this, we developed a plan, and I led the development of a plan with very senior faith leaders across the country. So if we were to have a multiple fatality attack or a mass casualty attack, how would we deal with it? And we had a 14-day plan. And that's what we put into action following Westminster. So that's just the background. Quickly, the model that we've been using is very quickly is to communicate with all our senior stakeholders, from MPs, leaders of council, local authorities, community leaders. Communicate, tell them what we're doing straight away. Tell them that we understand how they're feeling, tell them that. And then we have a plan of engagement with faith premises, with schools, with school assemblies, with local neighbourhoods, so where they're engaging. We have a policing philosophy and a policing patrols plan, and the philosophy is normally a light, friendly presence in neighbourhoods. So people see you as friends, not as something which is overbearing and threatening. That's what the police uniform is not there to represent. It's a time to reassure people. And then we conduct something called a CIA, which is not American, by the way. It's a community impact assessment to understand what the rhythm in local communities is, what's going on, how are people feeling. And at this stage, it's not about facts and figures. We're not applauding success because we haven't had hate crime reports. We're asking people how they feel. So it's a big difference to how it was when the Rigby happened. But we do have response to hate crime. My approach has been, if there's been a hate crime, if the community gather around that to understand its impact. Whether it's against our Jewish communities or Muslim communities or any other communities, we understand that it's probably isolated, mischievous, but it's not one community turning against another. That's really important for me to keep the cohesion there. Westminster Bridge, shocking, absolutely shocking. A police officer, colleague, friend was murdered in that attack. But in terms of how we occupied suddenly the public space by exercising the 14-day plan, I think we did okay. Hate crime went up for a couple of days, came back down, and generally communities were cohesive. The 14-day plan aims to understand how communities are feeling and do something about that. So the first 6 or 7 hours, shock, distress, confusion, disorientation. So we try and feed that with lots of information to reassure people. As the news sinks in, people start to digest and understand how they're feeling, and some of that can turn into resentment, hate, action, and then we try and galvanise people through their vigils or books of condolences, try and keep people together, and that's how we're doing. We're managing to keep people together, and I'm pleased that the 14-day plan and our efforts, all our efforts, worked in Westminster Bridge. Exactly the same as applied to Manchester, not so good. Although you would have seen lots of people gathering and speaking the same language, the tremors of a new change were noticeable, and hate crime did go up, so there was a backlash. And suddenly, whilst we were still exercising the 14-day plan, I think we were at day 10 or 11, we hadn't finished that. We get to London Bridge and Borough Market, and that's been the turning point. It's been the turning point because I think people have had enough, and this is what we've got to realise. And I don't agree with that, but I understand. You have to understand why people have reached that age. The anti-Muslim sentiment online has been incredible. It has been strong, it's been relentless, and it is there. So Muslim communities are feeling generally fearful of the backlash. In London, hate crime has risen to the highest levels post-incident that we've ever seen, another indication. And the feedback that I'm receiving, I was receiving from community members, Muslim community members, was actually when Muslim people, clerics and leaders get together, and they're genuine in doing this. And I applaud them for doing this when they stand up and they denounce it and they condemn it and they show that physical presence that this is not us. We condemn this. The change has been, we don't believe you. It's not believed anymore. You always do this. Where are your deeds? We hear your words, we hear your expression. But what have you done to change this? And whilst maybe 3 months ago I may have been planning a quieter retirement, actually with my personal identity as a Muslim leader, my operational experience working at London for 31 years, policing for 31 years, last 3 years, absolutely being in the middle of heart of all communities. Genuinely, I just couldn't walk away. I couldn't walk away. And, you know, whilst I'm not in policing, I'm still with policing, and I still work in partnership, and I want to offer something that makes our country, our children, your families, my family safe. I want to be able to get rid of this. And some of that demands straight and tough talking, something that we haven't had the ability to do. And you may have read my article in the Sunday Times, and that's the start of it. And of course I've had pushback. I've had lots of pushback and lots of issues around that, and lots of people not agreeing with me, lots more agreeing with me. But leadership isn't easy. It's less easy when you haven't got the institution like the Met behind you, but it's important. And I feel compelled to do it. So that's where I think we need to go as we go forward. So the backlash has been something of a different scale, and I think it's changed the dynamic discourse. We're in a different environment, and so it's people who think, actually we can just overcome this and get back to normal. Life will go back to normal, but attitudes have changed, and we have to stitch those back together. So things need to change. The first thing that needs to change is we need to be comfortable with difficult conversations. This isn't about winning because we can insult one another. We're not trying to defame Islam. That's the last thing that British people want to do. People of other faith, they don't want to do that. So let's stop being so sensitive about the language. Let's open ourselves up to discussion. Let's understand what's driving this. And I have said that this menace, this terrorism lurks within Muslim communities, and I mean that. It does. I'm a Muslim. I've got a Muslim family. I'm Islamic. I'm proud of that. But it doesn't change or alter the fact that actually it's within our own communities. And the people most in those communities are themselves, and they have a responsibility. So I'll talk about what I think Muslim communities can be doing. But up until now, I think that Muslim communities, and when I speak to them, they talk in the same way I'm talking. I've sat down mosque floors, I've opened my fast with them, they speak to me in close quarter, they're saying what I'm saying, but they won't speak up. And I understand why they don't speak up, because there's a fear of backlash against them by the more hardline groups. They just won't do that. And they're family people who just haven't got the experience to be able to deal with that. Equally, when we need to be a bit more straight talking about what the issues are, I found that figures within authoritative positions have skirted around the edges, they haven't really said it. And That's no way to go, because on the surface we say challenge is a good thing, learning is a good thing, you know, we've got to be professional growing up. But if you read the Louise Case report, often we've shied away from difficult issues, or government programs have simply not delivered what they're supposed to be doing. And having got to where we've got to with London Bridge, I don't think no longer that's an option. We have to do something else. And that's why I'm talking here today. Not meaning to upset anybody, keeping friends, keeping us together, but dealing with business. It's not easy to engage with the Muslim community. That's not a communication issue, but that's an issue of what is the Muslim community? Who are they? You know, there's 16 different sects and denominations across the Muslim community. Very different, sometimes very different ideologies that oppose one another, rivalry, competition. So when we say, can the Muslim community please adopt this counter-narrative, don't be surprised if they think it must apply to the guy next door because it can't apply to me, because I'm different. I'm different. So just to try and explain a little bit of that, if I may, is, you know, within the Sunni sects, especially Salafism, and people say, oh, Salafism. Well, I just think it's too simplistic just to tag one thing, because I work with the Salafi community and we can work within that. But, you know, that is a denomination that restores the original practice of Islam for the first 3 generations following the passing of the Holy Prophet, peace be upon him. And they're trying to go to that generation. That's a personal choice. And the Quietist sect, the Quietist element of that, which is more puritanical in their belief, just get on with it. The jihadist element within that, more problematic, I would suggest. The kfir, which positive action is about, they take positive action in terms of like excommunication, so they're a bit more assertive around that. So you can't just say that is the problem, but we have to be aware of how their approaches are acting out in life in the UK and across the world. Wahhabism, a lot of things about Wahhabism and Saudi Arabia. Well, Wahhabism is a species of Salafism. It emerged in the late 18th century. It's specific to the Saudi context, but equally you can't turn around and say, well, that's our problem. You just can't say that. Because within that, there is a certain strain, Ikhwan. The Ikhwan movement provides the origins of ISIS ideology, but that doesn't mean all of Saudi people, all of Wahhabism is that way. I work with a lot of people from that community, and they're as secular and they're as pluralistic, and they talk about cohesion as much as anybody else. So again, you just can't. You know, if we're looking for easy wins, it's not that easy. And then in the mid-19th century, you had the emergence of the Deobandism, again a big movement within this country, juxtaposed to Brahlevi Muslims, and very orthodox. And then you have the Brahlevi Muslim sect, which is founded in the same context as the Deobandism. It's largely more of a Sufi mystic approach, which you might see a slight smile on the face. I think that's where I come from. But unfortunately, hardening as we speak, hardening of attitudes. And then you get this conflict and this uneasy existence between all of these. They don't mesh in, they don't talk, they've got their own ideological factors and they drive their communities in their own way. So what you've got is a Muslim community, but within that you've got very different Muslim communities. And apart from the Muslim beliefs within that, they're very different people. But what it requires is an understanding of these denominations, how their approaches are, because once you gain that understanding, you're able to then understand the language, the attitude, the opinions, interpretations, which all differ, and you're able to adapt your style of engagement around that. So if you just hold that view and say actually Muslim community, and I've just talked about some, I haven't talked about the tensions between Sunnis and Shias, I haven't talked about the view of Ahmadi communities, because I don't want to overcomplicate it, but if you just stick to those 4, and then on top of that you get Muslim people who've like, you know, the first, second, and third generation, fourth generation people. And you start thinking, well actually, how do they see all this? Well, the first generation people like my mum and dad, you know, quite naturally, understandably, probably try to cling on to their faith, their traditions, their customs and norms from back in Lahore in Pakistan, because that's all they knew. The fear of losing that, not knowing what the new world would look like. The second generation people like me probably felt a bit more conflicted. School was different to home life, living in two different worlds. But it was less of a choice then, less of a binary issue. You had to be one or the other. In the second generation, I just thought that you could be both, just moderately both between them. You could just string life through that. But the third generation, I think, has been more starkly about actually, if you're Muslim, you need to be like this, or if you're not Muslim and you're more Western, you have to be in a different way. And it's almost, I feel from the exposure that I've had, interaction I've had with communities, they feel compelled to make that choice, especially in universities, and it's not a choice. And unfortunately, if you're not putting yourself up as Islamic or Muslim or following that trait, you're almost considered as a non-Muslim, something different, isolated. So there's a threatening environment around this where people need support. The reality is actually, if we could talk more about the compatibility between Western ideals and values and virtues and Islam, you'll see there's so much similarities. There shouldn't be a better choice. But that choice has emerged, and no one's, I don't think, stopped and said, why is this going on? I'll talk a little bit about that a bit later on. So I think the fourth generation have arrived at a point where actually they're torn, identity crisis, they're conflicted, and they're seeking some sort of, who am I? They're seeking that, where do I belong? Where do I belong? And when you're in that situation, one of the things that you can go back to is your belief system, which goes back to Islam. Not a lot of people understand the differences in denominations or doctrines of school. They just understand what they are. They don't understand the history around that. It's a bit like saying, actually, my political persuasion may be conservative or liberal, but I may not know what labels I'm within. I am who I am. And I think they need to understand. We need to help understand and explore with them what that means. So you've got different forms of Islam. You've got perhaps an identity crisis in intergenerational gaps. And then you've got people within societal conditions. Often, where we are now, it's lacked integration, so they've remained as they are. In fact, Louise' case in the report does make for me anyway, a very important point which just stood out from the whole report is actually every generation is like the first generation. She's done the review, which means that generations haven't really progressed or transformed. They are as they were. And if I'm talking about my mum and dad in the late 60s, if they didn't integrate or they were not aware of how to do that, I can understand that. But I can't understand that in 2017. Where your first language is English, where you wear night trainers, where you do all sorts of things that are Western. I just can't understand that. But it hasn't moved on. Conditions as well, often but not universal. Conditions are lived in, especially Muslim communities. If you take the Pakistani, Bangladeshi community, or some parts of the Somali community, you look at the index on the social status, deprived homes, low educational achievements, job prospects low, health, housing, and those sort of issues, more on the lower level of the ladder. So, A, confused about religious identity, B, confused about who they are in terms of personal identity, C, their living conditions ain't so bright either. And how they're clinging on, they're just looking out to try and get somewhere. And along comes, wow, an ideology which easily captures them. So when I talk about Muslim communities needing to do more, yes, I'm talking about you need to report it. Of course I'm saying that. I'll never say don't do that. What I'm talking about is strengthening and improving the environmental conditions. So it becomes conducive to a way of life that is value-driven, is shared, is cooperative, is respectful. And it is not about we're not like them. It's not about difference. It's not about creating those gaps. So when you're in that position where also the ideology, where actually narratives of grievance, discrimination, conspiracy theories, injustices, these things come along to you, don't you know what they do against Muslim people? Indeed, you know, when Belgium happened, when the Brussels attack happened, minutes after it was breaking in the news, I was speaking of stories that this was the work of the European police to stop the refugee crisis, and people were thinking, that's right. And as ridiculous as it is, equally it's compelling that people believe it. I've heard that the attacks that we've suffered, I've heard conspiracy theories that this isn't the work of terrorists, it's the work of the police and the intelligence security agencies who are doing this to drive an immigration policy, to drive the hardening laws, to give them that justification. And when you get young minds who genuinely, we can turn around and sort of condemn that, but when you get young minds who genuinely believe that, and they talk to their mates about it, you can see the divide growing. And then the frustrating part for me is, actually, nobody within that space is challenging it. Just like nobody challenges the misuse of Holy Scripture in the Holy Quran and challenges and puts you right. Sometimes even people with hats and beards and imams just don't know the religion well enough to do that. But common sense can prevail, because a religion can never be like that. Not any religion, let alone Islam. So this ideology that comes along just justifies how they're feeling. Actually, I am hard done by. I can't get a job. I can't get a house. Prevent is about spying on us, and I can talk about preventing questions and answers if you want me to. It might be a good opportunity to explore that a little bit. It's about foreign policy. Well, I'm not suggesting you should agree with foreign policy. I'm not suggesting that at all. I'm suggesting the contrary. Exercise your democratic rights. Vote. Get a placard, stand outside number 10. Make your feelings known in a democratic way. We encourage freedom of speech. Look what's just happened in the election. Nobody liked the dementia tax. And look how that changed. This is democracy. The wonderful thing about our values is we encourage that. So work with that as opposed to attack it. So, in addition to that, people try and sort of say, well, where's the danger coming from? And they talk about reverts and converts. Well, converts to what? Well, Islam. Well, that's helpful. What sort of Islam? Where have they been converted? What mosque have they gone to? And I'm not trying to expand this, but I'm just trying to understand the denominational factors and where they're going to be, what end of the scale they're going to be at. If you're Sufi, it's going to require a different trait. If you're Salafi and you have that jihadi trait about you, it's going to require a different type of intervention. We need to understand that. So it's not just about them and those people being vulnerable. It's about us having to understand what is going to potentially drive them. So with all of that, I just find it a bit of a turmoil, a cycle of confusion that's going on, another spiral of confusion within the Muslim world, especially in the UK. So what do? Well, we certainly haven't been talking about it. We haven't entered that space, because that space requires real leadership. Somebody's going to stand there and do it. And I don't think it can be a non-Muslim. You may be eminently more talented than I am, have more knowledge, have your PhDs, but it's about resonance. They will just dismiss and say, that's your world. It's different. You have to have somebody in that world to do it, or a set of people to do it. And with 3 attacks, we can't just wait for a period of evolvement, that this is just naturally going to happen now, organically. It's not. Bring it forward, and let's start leaving this agenda. Because we need to be able to understand how to relate to these conflicted, and understand these conflicted feelings, and get into that personal space of hurt, anger, rejection, and work within that space. And that's what I call engagement. So my approach for my operational learning is, and I've worked across the whole of London. You may have seen me doing some bits around there, where I'm understanding communities in different environments, sometimes right at the operational end, where it's very tense and very risky. But what's really enormously helped me is my ability, where I picked this up. So I wasn't born a scholar, by the way, and I certainly didn't go through a degree to understand this. I've learned this in London through operational practice, where I've just understood what the Syrian community is like, what the history is. And dare I say that the Syrian community settled it remarkably well in London. The areas in which they've settled report back saying, actually, as a result of this community settling here, we feel our lifestyle, our quality of life's gone up. Wonderful. The Syrian community come to me, and this may seem a really small point, but it's a really big point, is they say, Mr. Chishty, can you help us integrate? I said, well, what do you like me to do? Can you just give us a list of points as to, if we knock on somebody's door and say we want to make friends with you, what the reaction may be. If we want to help somebody with shopping bags, is that going to be well received? You know, if we want to raise money for not anything other than maybe the local green where we can put swings inside, we want to do that, we want to contribute. How is that going to be taken? I think how wonderful is that to receive that? The Somali community, I had a conference call not so long ago with 1,892 Somali women. Yeah. And I'm really, really encouraged by them because of the honesty, the openness. They know they've got a gang problem, they know they've got feudal problems with, which has been carried over from the home of Somalia. They know that violence is in place, they know that actually people haven't gone into education because they haven't understood safeguarding and parental, and they want to do something about this. Equally, I've had a conversation about FGM, very interesting as to what they report and what sometimes the government report, and I believe them. So we've got to be able to get into and understand communities in a much more sophisticated way, as opposed to just broad approaches, which I don't think are going to hit the mark. Why do we need to do this? Because of the threat. Threat is there, and that threat is emerging into risk. We've seen that. We've seen that. I think that this danger continues to lurk within Muslim communities, and what I hear back is a rebuttal. Well, we can't see it. You can't blame mosques. We're doing enough. And I want to get over that debate, because some of that is happening in our mosques. I know for a fact it is. I'm not saying everywhere, but I did an interview this morning with Piers Morgan on GMTV, and I was asked a question. Categorically, I'll tell you it's happening in our mosques. Quite extreme views and attitudes are there, but not every mosque, a small minority. But what I want to get up to is, a lot of Muslim communities also say to me, is actually we can use the presence of a mosque to be able to build and develop and go forward and progress. And when I asked, well, what does that look like? They said, well, actually the sermons always talk about actually when you die, the ability to go to heaven. And I know I resonate with that, because I've heard a lot of that as well, saying actually I've got to be a bit better behaved, otherwise I won't get there. So please pray for me. But people are saying, well, why can't the imams, why can't we just have the Friday sermons, for example, focusing on actually your duty as a citizen and your citizenship, your duty to make a benefit to your own community, your duty to have a view that is more inclusive, your duty to make sure that women have a equal, positive, strategic leadership role within society. What about all those things? This is what the community is telling me. So how do I now get this across 2,600 mosques, all of which have got different strains and avenues? I have got an idea, I'll talk about it a bit later. So the community has been quite open about this, but you'll not hear those community voices because they're quiet. I hear them, and they'll bear that out. But what you hear is the voices of denial, and that is actually hindering us. And you know, when you hinder progress, if it means that you might make a small loss, or you're not going to make as much advancement, then actually, you know, you may be able to take a bit more of a different approach. But when it's killing people, where parents are losing their children, children losing their parents, it's not good enough. And that's the harm I'm talking about. So we need to step into something different now to make this change. So, moving on for that, so the golden question is, what do we think we can do? Well, I think we need a call of action. I think we need to do something now. I think we need to show deliverables in the next 3 months. And I think if we're really serious about it, we start to get to work on this now and show that. So I think we should, it's difficult to map extremism, but what you can map from the descriptions I've given you, it's far more detailed than that, so it's not as simple as that. But you might be able to map areas of the country where vulnerability, amenability, propensity, the drivers, the factors that might lead people into becoming more radical, more fundamental, even more extreme and more violent with extremism. We may be able to get that understanding. And we may face a chorus of, oh my God, you are looking at us with eyes of suspicion. Well, we'll work with you on that. because I don't think you understand it either, but it's something that needs to be understood. And I think we could kick that off, and I think that's 3 months' work, and we can get a bit of an idea as to trying to understand where our interventions and what type of intervention should be focused on. I think mosques play a really, really important role. They're highly influential. And the network of mosques works almost like a business model. So if you're a wholesaler of electrical items, and I remember that in policing, and you were being subjected to break-ins, I wouldn't just talk to the town centre. I would talk to that network, because I want to get to that network. Or, you know, if you're a perfumery where perfume's been stolen from the shop fronts, I'll get to those people. So you can talk to the community of Wahhabi practicing, or Salafi, or Deobandi, or Sunnis, or, you know, you can do that. You can do that. But I do think that we need to get leaders together and get them to accord to some sort of charter, part of which would be an ability of self-regulation. Self-regulation to include what sort of outreach programs they're conducting, what they say in their daily or weekly sermons. And wouldn't it be great if every single mosque was saying exactly the same thing, and we did it consistently week in, week out? One thing I know about change is you just repeat the same thing until you drill it home. So wouldn't it be good if we could do that? If they had a policy about involving women on their boards, why not go 50-50? Have a 50-50 equal gender balance on your mosque committee. I don't hardly see any there. Why don't we stop having segregation and go for integrated rooms? After all, when you perform Hajj and you circumvent the Holy Kaaba, that's not women this side and men that side. That's where we're walking together in front of God. So why can't we do that if our deeds and intentions are noble, which they are? What about the curriculum for madrasas? What about the agreement that we can have spot checks by the self-regulation body that do that themselves and report publicly? You know, that starts to drive improvement. It's no different to any other establishment I've worked in. It starts to make you think. It can make you feel, nobody likes scrutiny and inspection. It used to bore me, by the way. But I've got used to it. I think it's a necessary good, although you might not like it. I think Islamic society, especially ISOCs, in universities, they're the leading academic part of our generations. And yet, you know, things like segregation, things about, you know, foreign policy, things about prevent, things about negativity, things about anti-Western sentiment. And I would just urge them to stop and think. They can help us make the difference. After all, we all live in this country as one community, and we're trying to now deal with a threat and danger in front of us. I'd also like to call for an action today for every single Muslim, from a young person all the way through to my mother-in-law even, who's well into her late 60s, but has got a WhatsApp app or a Facebook, to get on there and start to denounce extremism as not theirs. And all of a sudden you'll find, actually, maybe these extremist voices begin to shrink. Maybe people think, oh my God, we're not part of it. Remove their dominance, starve them of that oxygen, make sure they've got a powerful lobby against them. We can do that. We can do that now. We can do that today. Okay? Don't attack me for saying that actually dangers lie within mosques, because they do. Instead, use your voice and protect us, and maybe alleviate, maybe avert the next terrorist attack. Because the security services and my colleagues former colleagues in the policing circles will do their best. But as the previous commissioner says, we've got to be good all the time. They've just got to be lucky once. And for their luckiness, like, yes, I'm telling you, people die. And that's not acceptable. So let's all work at it together. I think there's some immediate fixes we can do. And I've picked this up as I've gone around, where we want information, we want a relationship with Muslim communities, and yet I can understand that actually it might be difficult for somebody to pick up the phone and phone up the anti-terrorist hotline. It's a big thing to do. Unfamiliar, nervous. But if we can have intermediaries within communities, chaperones, we've done that with sexual offence victims, to help reassure them. If we can have that, it's not beyond our wit to be able to put in place local community support mechanisms to help that. They might even lead to growing trust and confidence between us, and we can positively relay some of the stories where I think we've dealt with things really sensitively, to just help them understand that. I think the biggest thing about prevent is a lot of people call it toxic. There's almost this will to defeat it, and once you've defeated it, well then what? You've got rid of the problem. But I think there is a difficulty within prevent, and what I pick up is actually people are worried about prevent, because if the prevent engages you, is that going to then mar you for the rest of your life? They're worried about their children, they've been engaged with prevent. Is that going to have repercussions for their life as going forward? And we need to operate in that space to understand what that means, how to reassure them, and work that through. And I think if we start doing that and start showing our policies around that, I think we'll gain a lot more support for such an important program. What I don't accept is toxic and it's broken, because when I've asked the question, Muslim communities, well, why is it? Well, people don't trust it. Well, why don't they trust it? And that's the response. Well, tell me why. And they cite some examples in the public media which I know are incorrect, and they're beating the drum about that, and they're like, I'm sorry, you don't know what you're talking about. But they act as if they do, almost in protest. I think we need some media toolkits. People have been telling me this for a long time. Mothers and families and those in safeguarding roles want immediately to understand what easy steps can they do for safeguarding on the internet. They want that, and we can do that quite quickly. Immediately, if we want to, we can have greater strategic leadership roles for women, 50-50. Even if we start off with a few mosques, it starts to show intent. And maybe within that difference, within that diversity, we might get a new thought generating, which is going to be really helpful. I would actually like to see the establishment by the Muslim community, but in partnership with government and law enforcement agencies, a national centre of excellence. Because we don't have that. A combination of strategy and intervention options, an ability to relate to the media and influence messages. They themselves conduct risk assessments in terms of risk, so there's no issue about actually spying, and we do that together. And that's an emerging model that I think could work, that's necessary for this moment in time. And lastly, if I may just say that I've had lots of approaches, and you may have heard this, for the Million Muslim March. People say, actually, we want to show we're British, we want to show we're Muslim, and we want to show our loyalty to this country, and we want to show that our values are shared, and we want to come out in great numbers. And they obviously relate back to the Million-Man March in those days against the war in Iraq, and they want to do a similar thing to symbolise their presence and their relationship and their home as Great Britain, and their belief in the ideals of Britishness as well as Islam, and show the world that. And if that is done, then hopefully that will soothe some of the anti-Muslim sentiment that's beginning to occur, and this rift that developed, I think, quite vividly following London Bridge may be able to heal. So that's something that is under consideration. But it's not just Muslims. I've had approaches from the Jewish community, other faiths, non-faith, LGBT community. One thing I'm mindful of is I just don't want to get the whole country marching. It's not about that. But ladies and gentlemen, I just thought that I'd just finish on that. Actually, things have changed, it's different. I think we need to have the courage to be able to open and honest dialogue. Even with my article on Sunday, even in an article that somebody at the back of the room did in The Guardian, I got a load of hassle for that. But it was the right thing to say, and I'll say it again. And there's a need to keep people's confidence and trust and grow that, so they feel strong and enabled. Thank you very much.